Nasthika, it's not that you're denying the existence of a God out there in heaven. You're actually denying the existence of the nature of the real nature of yourself. The Shruti is the word of the Veda. Yukti is reasoning, and Anubhava is direct experience. But the purpose of life, the meaning of life, is this exploration into the nature of the reality of the self. And this is what Hinduism and the Asthika framework and the Vedic traditions and Dharma is all about. We should never have despair. We should never have despair for our children. If we're saying that we want our children to be Hindu, then there must be something about Hinduism that we think is important for them. And Dharma gives you a peace and a strength that you otherwise wouldn't have had. So your child has come to you and said, I'm an atheist. So a few things. One, I would think is first to be grateful that they have the trust and the comfort to share that with you, because it's not maybe an easy thing for them to say. The beauty of Dharma in the sense that I am Brahman, that I am divine, that I am inherently Satchidananda is such a freeing and empowering thought. And it's impossible for me to believe that there's no path that'd be suitable for anyone within Hinduism, because there's such diversity and pluralism. Then being Hindu is really about finding that balance in life. So even if you just want to learn how to live a good life, Hindu Dharma has the answer for that. If you're in a place where there isn't a temple nearby, then the beautiful thing about Hinduism is every practice can be done at home.
So namaste everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on Hindu youth and atheism. We have a special guest today with us, Aditi Banerjee, and those who follow her on Facebook recognize her for a post. Especially I recognize her for the post on devotional bhakti and sadhana related. She is a prolific author and novelist, and she has published best-selling books, The Curse of Gandhari and Bob of Parvati. She has also authored Hindu love story, Dharmically Ever After, and her recent book, which is about to get published, Kashi, the Valiant History of Sacred Geography. She's a practicing attorney at Fortune 500 firm. With these words, let me welcome Aditi to our show.
Namaste. Thank you so much for having me, and especially on this topic, which I'm very excited to have a discussion about.
So, before we start conversation on this topic, we would like to share you background information. How do we come up with this topic, and what we hear from community and parents regarding this topic, right? So this is in fact, not a new issue or new phenomena. We've been hearing from parents on and off that their kids are claiming the atheist identity. We have seen it that many kids who claim this, in fact, those kids who don't claim the atheist identity, they are resistant to engage in any Hindu religious practices. So they have doubts. In many cases, doubts are not clear, or in many other cases, they are not even open to discuss about it, but they don't participate or they don't subscribe to Hindu philosophy, right? So that's widespread phenomena, nothing hidden here. Further, what we have noticed is that this is not something unexpected if you consider what is happening in the schools and parents. Let's start with the school, where most of our kids go to secular public schooling. And we very much know that in secular education, they have removed the divine aspect completely. And if we recall, at least myself, when I was growing up in Bharat and attended school there, we had we used to start the classes with prayer, and we used to have an open celebration of Hindu festival in classroom. Of course, we cannot expect this to be happening in American classroom, but contrary to that, we may see that our kids are encountering Hindu-phobic education in classroom. That is not alone. We also see that in secular education, there is a great emphasis on professional success. So rest of the factor or rest of the things needed for character development or personality development are not that much valued, right? So we have now separated the divine aspect from classroom, and the theme of classroom is that professional success is major thing which they need to achieve, rest of the things are not much important enough. So that is in classroom. Now come to parents. We have noticed that unlike previous generation, forget about the joint family. In fact, the parents who should be at giving more time to kids are not able to give for various reasons. Perhaps they are busy with work, or they also have some habits like social medias, where they are spending too much time and they are not able to allocate enough time. So with that, we see that they are not giving the importance to Hindu cultural and religious activities. We see that celebration of Hindu festival is not priority. If they are celebrating those, then those festival is celebrated in a manner that it's just eating, drinking, and marrying. Nothing unique about each celebration, which we usually found in traditional Hindu festivals. Further, we see that the festival celebration, like even Diwali, they don't take the day off, right? So where there was a chance where kids could participate in certain Hindu religious activity or rituals, they tends to not participate or not host that at the home. Now let's come to how this factor impact the current generation versus the previous generation. Of course, these factors were affecting the previous generation, but what has changed with the current generation is that uh, their constant need for their mind are trained for instant gratification and dopamine releasing activities like video games and social media. So that is also making them spend too much time on these activities, and then they get immune to any kind of activities like Hindu rituals or pujas or going to temples or listening to some spiritual or stories or those kind of thing, right? So these are the factors which we see that constantly making things bad for current generation. And as we mentioned that in the previous generation, there were skeptics out of secular schooling. We see that majority of these kids were coming out as a youth in terms of how they view the Hindu worldview as well as Hindu practices. They were skeptics, but in this generation, they have gone one step further, and many of the kids or youth, you can say, are openly proclaiming that they are atheist. So with this background, Aditi, this question I'm going to ask you is, why is atheism attractive for this generation?
So Yagesh, you brought up a lot of good practical points and questions, and I want to get into that. But I want to start from a place of first principles. And as an author and an attorney, words and their meaning are very important. So I want to start just with this word atheism and how we think about it in a Hindu context. So the etymology of atheism is from the Greek atheos, and that really means without God. And so an atheist is not a person who does not believe in God. An atheist is a person who positively believes there is no God. So it's not an absence of a belief, but it's a different type of a belief. In contrast to that, there is agnosticism. So that is agnostos, which means without knowledge. So an agnostic believes either that he or she does not know, or that it's unknowable whether there is the existence of God. And these two words, even though they come from Greek, but they really became prominent in an Abrahamic sense when you had a Judeo-Christian God, and then the question of his existence. That framework doesn't really apply in Hinduism. And so when you come to the Hindu framework, it's not a question of whether one is a theist or an atheist. The framework there is whether one's Asthika or Nasthika. And Asthika, again, the etymology means there is or there exists. And Nasthika is there is not or there exists not. And so then the question comes, what is this of whose existence we speak? Is it a theistic God or a creator God, like the way we think about when we talk about atheism? And I would say that it's not, because even within the Asthika schools, you have Mimamsa and Sankhya, which do not believe in a divine being like a god. So in Mimamsa, the Vedic mantras themselves generate the devas. So the devas come from the mantras, but do not have their own independent existence. Yet they are part of the Astika schools. So Astika really means the sense of Brahman And Brahman can be saguna with attributes, what we think of as Ishvara or Shri Krishna, Vishnu, Shiva, or Nirguna without attributes, which is impersonal. And it is also really about the existence of the self. So it's not about this God somewhere out there, but it's about understanding the essence of the self. And an Asthika is someone who follows the Vedic path or accepts the Vedas as having authority. And here the Vedas would mean the Shruti and the Smriti, which is derived from the Vedas. And in this sense, it's much more about, like I would say, the existence of the self. So, for example, in the Upanishads, you have the Mahavakyas, the great sayings, and in Vedanta, those sayings are interpreted according to whether one is Advaita, Dvaita, Vishishtadvaita, Shuddhadvaita, Shuddhvaita, and they have different interpretations. So, for example, if you take the Mahavakya Tattvamasi, what is that really about? So in the Chandogya Upanishad, this is when the saying first appears, and it's in a dialogue between Uddalaka and his son Shvetaketu. And he says, in the beginning, son, this world was simply what is existent, one only without a second. And it thought to itself, let me become many, let me propagate myself. It cannot be without a root. Look to the existent as the root. The existent, my son, is the root of all these creatures. The existent is their resting place. The existent is their foundation. The finest essence here, that constitutes the self of this whole world. That is the truth. That is the self, Atman. And that's how you are, Shvetaketu. And so in this sense, what we're really talking about is the self. And if you're saying you're a Nasthika, it's not that you're denying the existence of a God out there in heaven. You're actually denying the existence of the nature of the real nature of yourself. And that is the difference. The other important difference is that when it's about atheism and theism, it's fundamentally about theology and belief and faith. Whereas in Hinduism, it's about realization, and faith may be there at the starting point, but you're coming to your own direct perception. So for example, when we talk about the rishis are the ones who've seen the mantras, or they've seen the truth. So they haven't just believed it, but they've actually perceived it in the clarity of their own minds. And also in Dharma, when you have what we call the pramanas of how you know whether something is true or not, you typically talk about Shruti, Yukti, and Anubhava. So that is there in Vedanta. So Shruti is the word of the Veda. Yukti is reasoning, and Anubhava is direct experience. And so for something to be held as true, according to Adi Shankaracharya and the Acharyas, it has to be consonant with all three. It has to be consonant with the Veda for the matters covered by the Vedas. It has to be consistent with reasoning, which doesn't mean it's rational, but it's not irrational. And then it has to be something that you have direct experience of. And sometimes this gets confused and people think Anubhava is just my own subjective reality and whatever I feel or whatever I believe, that's true. But this Anubhava, it's something that has to be validated. So it has to be in consonance with the Vedas, and through Sampradaya and Parampara and through accepted authorities, your experience is validated. And then instead of faith, what we have, and this is the last term I want to cover, is what is called Shraddha. And Shraddha is very different from faith and belief in the Western sense. So again, the etymology of Shraddha is it relates to truth. So it comes from Shrat and Dharana, which is directing one's minds towards. And when you put that together, it's Shraddha. So it's actually a very dynamic process. You're not passively believing in something, but you're constantly striving towards the truth. And in the Viveka Chudamani, it says that acceptance by firm judgment of the mind as true of what the scriptures and the Guru instruct is called by the sages Shraddha, or faith, by means of which the reality is perceived. Again, this is the firm judgment means you're involved in this, you're reasoning through it, you experience it, and then you yourself perceive the reality. So this is very different from blind faith. And Adi Shankaracharya also referred to Shraddha as Asthika buddhi. So when you're in the Asthika framework, you're using Shraddha to seek and to realize yourself. And this is very important because, for example, in the great temple of Delphi, which was the sanctuary of Apollo, on the roof of the temple, it said, basically in ancient Greek, it said, know thyself. And the idea is that the purpose of life, the meaning of life, is this exploration into the nature of the reality of the self. And this is what Hinduism and the Asthika framework and the Vedic traditions and Dharma is all about, which is very different from just having a dogmatic belief in a religion per se, which is why I think atheism is not applicable in the same way. And then the last quote I want to share is from the Mahanayana Upanishad, which again shows the role of Shraddha in this process. So it says, those rays by which the sun gives heat, the same rays transform water into rain cloud, which showers the rain. By the rain cloud, herbs and trees come into existence. From herbs and trees, food is produced. By the use of food, the breaths and scents are nourished. When the life breath is nourished, one gets bodily strength. Bodily strength gives the capacity to practice tapas in the shape of self-control, religious fasting, and so forth. As a result of such tapas, faith in scriptural truth springs into existence. By faith, mental power comes. By mental power, sense control is made possible. By sense control, reflection is engendered. From reflection, calmness of mind results. Conclusive experience of truth follows calmness. By conclusive experience of truth, remembrance of it is engendered. Remembrance produces continuous remembrance. From continuous remembrance results unbroken, direct realization of truth. By such realization, a person knows the Atman. So again, this is about nothing stops at faith, but faith is part of this process. And through this process, we ourselves develop and evolve in so many ways. And there's actually a very beautiful parable that brings all of this together that Swami Sarvapriyananda once explained in one of his lectures about Shraddha, which was basically, let's say you're in college and you're taking a very advanced physics course. When you go to the class, you don't really know anything about physics, but you see there's a professor here. The professor has some credentials. He has an impressive resume. So maybe this professor has something that I can learn. So I'm going to have the Shraddha, that I'm going to have some respect or honoring of what this professor says, even though in the first few days it's not going to make sense to me. But then if I stopped there and if I just listened to what he said, I memorized it, but I did not internalize it, I wouldn't pass the class. If the tests are designed so that you can't just regurgitate what you've learned, you have to apply it. So then through study, through meditation on it, through thinking of it, through doing homework, through applying it in problems, then you internalize and that knowledge becomes your own. And so you start from a place of Shraddha, but then you work on it, you internalize it, and you make it your own direct experience. And only then is it successful. If you just parrot what someone else says, then you haven't learned, it hasn't become knowledge. But this is the way that we learn. And so I found that to be a very helpful parable. I'll pause here unless you want me to go to your first question on why atheism has become more popular.
Yes, so I think just to summarize what you are saying is first is we have to differentiate between atheism and Hindu framework where we classify as Asthika and Nasthika. And second is this Advaitic philosophy, right, which is right there in Veda, which we see that it's very quite logical in nature, right? And someone who is just looking things from logical perspective, if they come across this philosophy, it's highly likely that if they spend time, they will start seeing the value in it, right? So that is for sure that these two things for when youth or teen, when they say that I am atheist, these two things should be mentioned by parent for sure, right? Where we need to differentiate between atheism versus Astika and Nastika framework. And we also need to include this logical aspect of Hinduism where we are including how the creation came to be and how the purpose of the life and as you mentioned that we are exploring the nature of reality, right? Which they have to go through by themselves, right? It's not going to be theoretical dogmatic things, but they have to go through themselves before they claim themselves and conclude that, okay, I am atheist, I stop seeking anything, right? But they have to continue this journey. And then after that, they will realize that what is the nature of reality and what is the truth.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
so
I boil it down to 2 points, which is one, if you say that you're an atheist or a Nastika, what you're really saying is you're a non-seeker, that you don't even want to seek the truth. And you're also not denying the existence of some distant God out there, but you're actually saying the self doesn't exist, or there isn't a transcendent self. And is that really the conclusion you want to get to? And
yes,
also,
precisely.
atheism isn't itself rationalist, because like I said, atheism itself is a belief that there is no God. You can say, I don't believe in God because I don't see him or her, But I don't know, so I'm an agnostic. But if you're an atheist, you're saying, no, I know that God doesn't exist, but how can you actually know that in a rational way?
Yes. Right. Yeah. So now let's consider, I think, two aspects of it, of that question which I asked earlier. Why that identity is atheism, or atheist identity has become attractive option for today's young generation, right? I'm telling that as identity because when they claim it, right, it comes with certain expectation or certain behavior, right? Where they will say that, okay, I am atheist, so my parents when say that let's just do participate in certain rituals, or let's go to temple, right? I say, no, 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 I don't believe in it, I'm atheist, right? They don't have to explain too much behind this identity. Perhaps they are hiding behind their identity, this identity, new claimed identity, to resist any activities which they don't like, or there might be other reason. Your thoughts?
Yes. So I strongly recommend a book that has just recently come out by Kushal Mehra. It's called Nasthika. And in that book, Kushal describes how he's an atheist. He doesn't believe in a god, but he's still a Hindu. And as part of that book, he explains the history of the atheism movement, and especially modern atheism. And then he offers like a strong critique of it. But I think what is happening is it's a few things. One is we're in a general societal milieu where faith and organized religion has been in decline. A lot of that is kind of specific to Western history and the history of the church and organized religion here. What it has done to minorities, history of violence, history of persecution, abuse within the church, and there's been a turning away from it. When we as immigrants and second generations come into that, even though that may not be our direct history, we become part of it. We import it into our thinking. And even in Bharat, we see that happening. So that's one part of it. The second part of it you've alluded to, which is it's not fashionable, or it's not, cool to be Hindu because there's so much negative baggage out there through through spread of misinformation and other things where people just want to shy away from the baggage of their Hindu identity. And so that's why I think there's just a refusal to engage, or an unwillingness to engage, because it's just seen as something negative. So that's kind of what we're up against. Um, my counterpoint to that would be that in this country, there is freedom of conscience, right? So it's very important in this country to have freedom of thought, freedom to question things, freedom to question authority. All of that comes into place, and that is fine. But what that means is then, just the same way, if you're born into a family, you're born into a certain ethnic or cultural heritage, it's expected that you want to explore those roots or to understand where you've come from, and that's a part of your growing up journey. So Hinduism is also part of that. And so it's a responsibility to explore Hinduism, to get to know it. And then if after that you want to reject it, then there's a freedom to reject it. But the problem that we have is that the first part doesn't happen, of actually exploring and experiencing it and then making an informed decision. And in that sense, I think one thing that we have to ask about atheism is atheism prizes itself on being rationalist, based on a scientific temperament, and taking us away from dogma and doctrine. But in reality, we actually find that's not the case, right? So in the absence of religion, you had Nazism, you had communism, and now you see this rise in wokeism. And we see these ideologies, they're very totalitarian. They're not arrived to but by like critical thinking and things like that. There is very strong dogma. There's a sense of what is good, what is bad in very categoric terms, and there is an inclination towards violence, or kind of forcibly imposing this on others. So all of the negative traits of religion that atheism, quote unquote, seeks to take us away from, it actually leads us straight back there, except now it's unmoored in ethical or moral frameworks. Um, and so I think what we see today, and we've seen a lot, in the recent debates over, anti-Semitism, pro-Palestinians, and we've seen a lot of, well-to-do Indian American Hindu students and young people getting caught up in this. One is facing sentencing in jail and things like that. And sometimes people ask, like, why is this happening? And I think why this is happening is, one, there's this atheism or this alienation from Dharma. But I think the second part, which we really have to be cognizant of, is even when you take religion out, psychologically, there's a fundamental human need for faith, for values, for having a sense of belonging, for community, for all the things that religion or dharma provides. And so what we have to understand is we haven't transcended the need for religion or spirituality. We never will. And so then we have to tap into that and find ways of fulfilling those needs without our kids turning into very misplaced and destructive ideologies, and grounding them in a dharmic framework. So I think part of it starts with a logical discussion of, you say you're atheist, but how have you come to that conclusion? Have you done your due diligence as an individual, as a critical thinker, to really say, well, what is God? What is the nature of God? There's so many books out there. There's so many practices you can try, and then said, no, I don't believe in it. And if not, it's kind of your duty as a human being to do that. And then the other part is, by not being an atheist, by not being a believer in Hinduism, are you not in some other ways subscribing to dogma and doctrines and things like that? Is this social justice or wokeism? Is that really a better substitute for dharma? And then part of it is, I think, so that's like the logical debate part of it. But then part of it is what I think is experiential, and really exposing our kids from as young an age as possible to Hindu experiences, that it becomes part of their life and their lifestyle. Even if they don't enjoy it, or even though it may not be meaningful to them in the beginning. But if it is there, then that samskara is instilled, and they will come back to it at a certain point.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think you brought up the two good points, at least out of this much. I picked 2 points where the impact on those ideology, right, which is not in harmony with the Hindu philosophy. And as you mentioned, right, the kids are drawing towards that, but at the same time, the personal impact they have on their values, their behavior, their mind, right, peace of mind, right. It's not something. I would say parents should be identifying that and pointing back to the kids, saying that, is this making your life better? If by following this philosophy, right, are you being peaceful to yourself? Are you harmonizing yourself with others, right? So that is also the subscribing to this ideology and comparing it with Hindu philosophy, right? We could clearly see that it also comes at the personal expense, where personal values and things, and peace of mind as well, right, tends to overlooked in the process. And the other aspect, I think you mentioned that it could be multiple reasons behind it, right? It's not one reason, right? There is a reason where they could identify with the social justice movement, or they could identify with the rational aspect of where they are coming from Western framework, and then they say that, okay, now I reject it because that's what the religion has done, right? And world over, and they bunch Hinduism in the same basket as other religion. And we see that, I mean, that's quite possible, right? What we see that in much of the case, that these kids are not willing to listen. They have reached to the point where they are not in I would say, argue back or listen to their parents regarding even good aspect of it, right? There is no open discussion, right? So how do you encourage this kind of thing from the beginning itself, right? Where they should be open about it, the discussion, and parents should be open about it, right? If kids come with such claim that, okay, I'm an atheist, right? It's not a done deal, right? There has to be an open discussion around it, right? Why they are, and where they are coming from, right? What they are subscribing to right now, right? So those kind of thing, as well as the openness of dialogue, continuous dialogue, right? It's not one time process where you could explain things in 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 1 hour. It's this continuous process where you have to continue to engage and engage and engage. And it is possible that they may come out of it by their own, right? Or they may see the value, at least, that what you are coming from Hindu perspective. So with that said, I want to ask this next question, where from traditional Hindu perspective, how do you see that atheism, right? Which you elaborate a little before. But at the same time, I want to ask you if there was an instance in the past mentioned in our scripture where how they dealt with this situation, right? And uniting it with what we are seeing right now, right? How we can utilize that.
Yes. So in Hinduism, being what I call like a non-theist, or not believing in what I call like Saguna Brahman, in and of itself is not wrong, or it's not invalid. Like I said, you have the Mimamsa and Sankhya schools. Even in Vedanta, in a certain sense, you can think of Brahman as Nirguna Brahman, and not get into the notion of a personal creator God. That at the same time, that doesn't mean you disrespect the devas. It doesn't mean that the devas and Ishvara isn't, vitally important to Hindu practice and Hindu tradition, but there's a space for that. What has been very strongly criticized is being a Nasthika. And so there are, documents of like very intense debates between like a Charvaka philosophy, which is essentially materialist, and the Asthika schools, and, rebuttals of this idea of just life is just basically material. There's nothing beyond that. And the basic idea is that having some sense for what is punya, what is papa, what are like good things to do, what are, non-advisable things to do, respect for the teacher, respect for the devas, these kinds of things are as part of like the Vedic path. So abandoning those, like, that has been criticized. Obviously, adharma has been criticized. And so, a lot of times when people talk about Hinduism, they make it seem like so open, as if like anything goes, but that has never been the case. There has been a strong categorical rejection of kind of being a Nastika. And by that, like I said, I say, like, I think of it as essentially saying that a Nastika just thinks there's nothing more than this. There's no, there's no self beyond this physical body. It's always the case as part of human nature. In every yuga, there are people who don't live a dharmic life, or who who stray from dharma, and then how to deal with them. So in that sense, the questions that we're facing aren't new. So I think that has always been there, but there has been a strong emphasis on what I'd call like the Asthika kind of path. But if you see in the Puranas and things like that, you have within families, you have a very strong religious person, and then their child isn't. And then often what we find in Dharma is kind of like the sense of prayashchitta. So like there are a lot of Ekadashi stories, and there are stories from the Puranas where maybe like someone has been very fickle, they've been, hunting a lot, they've been womanizers, things like that, like very, very degenerate. But then Hinduism doesn't say, well, that person's a lost cause, they're going to burn in eternal hell. They say, well, that person will come back. And so usually what happens is that person, their parents say, what is happening? That person is cast out. And the person comes across a rishi or an acharya or someone who, in their compassion, says, what's wrong? Why are you suffering so much? They explain the problem, and then the sage will say, maybe like, observe this vrata, do this fast. And then they do that, and then they get mental clarity, and then they kind of come back to the path. And so some of the lessons we can take from that are, one, we should never have despair. We should never have despair for our children. If you think about it in the Hindu framework, if someone is born to us, they're born to us for a reason and for a purpose. And if we've done our duty, then they will come, they will come back, and they will have a good path. And then also that there's always a chance to make to have a new direction. And then the practices that we do, the sadhana that we do, they can work almost miraculously to produce changes in mind, clarity of thinking, and things like that, to bring us back to what I call like the Asthika path. So that's, I think, like an overall lesson we can take just from our shastras and our tradition and our history, because this isn't new, and that it's always been there in a sense. And then part of that, I spoke about Shraddha, and I think part of that Shraddha is something as parents we also need to have, in ourselves, in our children, and in Dharma. And so we've talked a lot about like the negative baggage, or like the challenges that are out there, the costs there are to having a Hindu identity. And sometimes I think we forget, well, if that's the case, then why would anyone want to be a Hindu? And the thing is, like, Hinduism has such strong, benefits and good things that are completely unique. And if we have faith in that, then we'll say that, Swami Chinmayananda said his job was to convert Hindus to Hinduism. In a sense, that's what we're really talking about. But I think having Shraddha in the benefits of Hinduism. So for example, like I wear a bindi. I also wear it to the office place. And when I first was going to start doing that, my mother was concerned. She said, "Don't you think people will look at you and think this is weird because you don't really see women here wearing that, and they'll say, why are you wearing this red dot on your head and things like that." So there's a maybe like a social cost. And I thought about it and I said, no, I still want to do this. And why did I want to do it? It's because the benefit outweighed the cost. So the benefit for me is in the morning when I put on my bindi, it reminds me I'm divine. There's divinity within me. And by putting this sindoor on, I'm protecting myself. And that's the positivity that comes from that and the strength that comes from that is so much greater than any social cost. And by the way, I haven't found it to actually have a social cost because it's actually started many conversations in the workplace. So why do you wear a bindi? What does it mean? Things like that. So it's actually been a good thing. So from that comes strength and pride and being different. And nowadays being different is a good thing. So a lot of times I think because of insecurity, we try to pass, we try to conform and things like that. But as you find out later in life, it's actually being unique, having something different to contribute that makes you stand out and that makes you successful. Um, Along those lines, the other day, so this past Monday was Nirjala Ekadashi. So Ekadashi, which comes twice a month. Once a year, it's completely Nirjala. And there's a reason for that, which I won't get into. But on that day, you're not supposed to even have a drop of water. Now, Ekadashi is something that's largely become forgotten, or people think it's something their grandmothers do, or things like that. I was so happy to see when I posted about Nirjala Ekadashi, when people were observing it, and then I saw on Twitter or X, someone posted that many young people reached out to them and they said this is the first time they're observing Nirjala Ekadashi. And I think one thing that's happening is you're seeing like a lot of people out there, like Raja Shinandi and others, who are very proud and upfront about doing sadhana, about like leading their traditional lifestyles, Jai Sai Deepak and things like that. So now there are more role models out there who are unabashedly Hindu, and people can see this is a good thing. They're being successful as Hindus, not just not in spite of being Hindu, and that brings more value to the Hindu identity. And I think over time that'll help motivate people to follow those practices more.
No, beautiful answer. Yes. So yeah, I mean, one thing you mentioned about Swami Chinmayananda, right? And he has his story, in fact, is very relevant to topic we are discussing here. He himself was atheist, right? He was a journalist. In fact, he went on to his future guru, Swami Sivananda, his ashram, to expose him, so-called expose things. He stayed there, he stayed there, he stayed there, and he remained there, right? He found the answer of life, and the rest is the history. So the lesson we could learn is that at least he was open to it, right? He was atheist, right? It was not a destination, it was part of a journey. He was open to it, learning things, right? And things come along and he changed his perspective, and that could very much happen to the today's generation, and this example should be quoted quite often. Okay, so moving on, there is also a trend, right, where of course I mentioned that in a school there is overemphasis on logical faculty development, right? The mind should be razor sharp, right? There is not much emphasis given to other faculty. So now when the kids look at the Hindu perspective, right, the first thing we have noticed is that in a philosophy, I mean, they, of course, the time they are not giving to Hinduism to understand what the philosophy is behind it, right? So that is given. So now when they come to the stage where they are teens, they don't have any idea about philosophy, right? How it is driven, various philosophy, even one philosophy of Hinduism, they are not able to explore or identify or you can say explain in a simple word, right? Now, when they come to a stage where parents only thing they are asking for, them to do is, okay, let's just go to temple, let's just do some rituals, or let's just do some basic wearing of tilak bindi or something like that on occasion, right? And that's something they start the resistance, right, where they say, no, 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 I don't want to do it, because they have certain logic to it, saying that they have seen it, that I don't find that there is a explanation behind these practices. There is no philosophy behind practices. That is one thing, but there is even not explanation behind why we are doing what we are doing, right? And now that's where this logic they take and turns towards Western framework of atheism. So how do you, if you see this perspective, saying that now they are trained in Western logic, right? they see everything from Western logic. How do you explain this to the kids? Hindu version of logical explanation of philosophy, right? Where, of course, what we propose, and I want you to, I want your version of a thing as well. But what we propose is that even at this point, you could very much explain that Dharma is the overarching principle running this cosmos, and it is not some. I mean, Brahman is akin to nature itself, right? It is not something someone sitting there and just ruling things, but nature itself working out what we have described as a Brahman, right? And the concept and core principle like karma and rebirth are not something just imposed, but this is what nature, how it works, right? This is what our rishi has recognized, that this is how nature is working, right? So this is a framework which we propose that they should explore and explain to the kids, because it's the logical things which they could utilize. Your take on this?
So I think there's sometimes too much emphasis on logic, and I think sometimes we overestimate the influence logic has on us. Because I think at that stage, if you're having an intellectual explanation of something, it's almost maybe too late, or it's not enough. So I'll give an example of this. Like in this country, when you have a birthday, you blow out candles on the birthday cake, right? So this is something I never thought of. And then someone told me once, oh, blowing out a candle is not an auspicious thing. And I understood, okay, Agni is sacred, and you're extinguishing Agni. So intellectually, I understood it, but it didn't resonate with me. I was like, but it's just something we do. But then what happened is in my practice, in my daily practice, I light a deepa. And then as I do that, then through the practice of that, I have like a veneration for Agni and for the deepa. And if it goes out, I feel bad. And so then viscerally I felt like on a birthday of mine that there was a candle. Like I don't want to blow this out. But it's something I felt from within because of something that was it had become like a habit and a discipline, and it was something you could kind of feel within. Sometimes it happens through your own practices. Sometimes it happens through observing what others do. So, for example, if we accidentally touch a book with our feet, we touch the book and touch our head as a in prayaschitta, because the book is an embodiment of Ma Saraswati. You can have a very cogent explanation of the logic and the principle for it. But what's actually going to make a difference is if you see your parents doing it, then it just becomes a habit. And then later on, you understand, oh, the reason I do this is because of that. But so I actually think the emphasis is more in building some of those habits and disciplines. And even if you don't build them in your children, by following them ourselves, then they will see that, and it will create a certain understanding in them. So that's why when we talk about like samskara, what it really means is you're putting an imprint. So even if at the time of doing those things, it doesn't register, it doesn't mean anything, but that imprint is there, and in time it will come to fruition and have an effect. So part of it is I think it starts earlier. But then I think the other part of it is there's the explanation, and that should be part of it. But then also think about what, if we go to a temple, what can be something valuable for the child that they will get out of that experience. And some of it I think is making things more participatory. So I think something that temples could do is, find ways of involving young people, not in just putting shoes away or things like that, but doing things like like Rangoli competitions. You could have kids just engage in kirtan, like things like that. So finding ways of making it beneficial. So I think even things like meditation classes, so things like yoga and meditation have become so popular because they become very much divorced from Hinduism. And part of it is we have to take that back, because if we're saying that we want our children to be Hindu, then there must be something about Hinduism that we think is important for them. So maybe it's reading the Gita and understanding the philosophy of it. So maybe we ask them, okay, read the Gita, read a chapter of the Gita. You may not like it, but just read it and let me know what you think. And then asking them what they think and engaging in something with it. And things like that. So I think it's making things more participatory, helping them have that experience, because I do think once they have that experience, then that positive part of it will stay with them. And then part of it is some of those disciplines and habits that come, from an earlier time, and then they stay with you, even if they may not mean anything to you for some period of time.
Yeah, very good answer. Yeah, definitely. I mean, you could not explain many experiential thing through logic, right? It's just that much of a things in Hindu philosophy as well as you can say yoga, meditation, it start when mind stop, logic stop, right? Then experience start. So precisely the point.
I also
Uh,
think, there are two other aspects I would say, which is one is, I think in these conversations, it has to start not with our expectation or how we'd want our child or kid to feel, but to really think, okay, there is something that I want them to take away from this because it's good for them, it's good for their well-being, and it starts with that belief. And then I think when you know that, then as a child, when you know that, then you're much more open to listening. So I think another part of it, something that you could say, and maybe parents could share this from their own experience, because many of us when we were young weren't really exposed to Hinduism. But then later on, we wanted to learn. And then it was much harder to learn, like in our, like late 20s or 30s. And we kind of wished we'd known some of those things when we were younger. And so part of this is telling, as a teenager, there's so many things you want to do, and this seems like a chore. But, maybe this is something I've gone through that later on in life, I wanted to know these things, and it was almost much more difficult then to learn it. So if you just spend a little time now, in the future, you'll have been, you'll be happier for it. So I think that's also part of it.
yep. So one other experience we hear from parents is that when they have this conversation, okay, kids have or youth has announced that she or he is an atheist, right? Of course, the Western framework where they are describing themselves from. Then what parents' response is many cases that they reconcile to the fact that, okay, fine, you don't want to believe, that's okay, your choice. I'm giving up, right? It's not from the sense of that they cannot do or anything, but they don't want to do anything, right? Because they feel like, okay, I have given good samskara, and now it is my job is done. You are on your own, right? So this goes back to this earlier discussion we were having, saying that should we continue to have the open dialogue? And we are, of course, not pushing down our view, right? We don't want to do that, and that's Hinduism's not in that direction. We are not doing it, right? So here the question is, if they don't participate, parents themselves don't drive the open discussion, right? Hearing out and giving the other options and stuff, and keeping the discussion on, right? It is quite possible that kids continue on this path, right? So if they continue on this path, right, how that impact their life choices, their worldview, and their values they are going to adopt in future, right? How it is going to impact, right? So one thing we have noticed, and before I give you time for answering, a couple of things we always come back and say that, of course, if someone understand the karma, right, which is core principle of Hindu Dharma, right, where it is making you live the conscious life, right? It by default, if someone imbibe this principle, right, they will live the life with values, because that's what it is coming back to haunt them if they don't subscribe to it, right? If they don't do it properly, or they don't behave properly, or karma is not aligned, right? Of course, that is something they will have a real impact in their life. The second thing, of course, is that uh, rebirth principle, it also, right, makes you think that, okay, life is not about in one life I have to just explore and live it fullest, right, enjoy everything, right? But it is also about taking it step by step, right, living it consciously, right, versus just blowing it out, explore everything in one possible lifetime I have, right? So you also become conscious that way as well, right? So it clearly seems that if you imbibe this philosophy and stuff, there is a follow-up on how you live your life with values and stuff, values and the philosophy, right? Your thoughts on this?
Yes, so this is a really important point. So let's say, your child has come to you and said, I'm an atheist. So a few things. One, I would think is first to be grateful that they have the trust and the comfort to share that with you, because it's not maybe an easy thing for them to say. So first is to listen, to hear, to understand, and to ask, how they came to that conclusion, and to really be open and accepting of that. I think that's important. But now if you stop there and say, well, okay, they'll live a good life and I'm not going to do anything more, then that also is not, that's not correct, because it's kind of like a dharma sankat, because you want to give them freedom, you want them to do their thing, but you also have a responsibility as their parent to do as much as you can to provide for their overall well-being. And so at that time, I don't think it's appropriate to just let it go, because that also would be kind of an abdication of our dharma as a parent, which doesn't mean that you force anything, but then you have to really think, you have to have those conversations, so if, what are you giving up by being an atheist? I actually think you can be an atheist and still live an ethical life, or live like a, like a law-abiding life, and things like that. But there are things that you give up. So so if I think, for example, what has been important to me from being a Hindu, it's you go through very hard parts of life, and dharma gives you a peace and a strength that you otherwise wouldn't have had. So like for me, when my father passed away, that was the hardest thing that had happened to me. And if I didn't have dharma, I think I would have completely, like fallen apart. It was still very painful and very difficult, but because of my sadhana, because of my bhakti, I kind of knew it was going to be okay. I was going to be okay. This was going to be very painful. It was going to be a lot of things, but I didn't have like an existential crisis. So having that source of solace and strength is very important, because no matter how nice a life you have, the vicissitudes of life will hit at different times. There are many times at work that very difficult situations come up, challenges come up, very stressful situations. But when you practice yoga, you practice sadhana, you're able to navigate those situations with a lot more aplomb and strength and savvy. So these are all these things that you get from dharma. And then the other is, a lot of us growing up in this country, maybe we're subject to bullying or things like that. We have like self-esteem issues. The beauty of dharma, in the sense that I am Brahman, that I am divine, that I am inherently Satchitananda, is such a freeing and empowering thought. And it's something we may not feel that all the time, but I remember when that first came to my mind, I said, oh, I don't have to think about whether I'm good or evil, bad or things like that, but I just am divine. I am Brahman, but like that's my true nature. This Aditi energy is just something, temporary. That is such a powerful thought. And by becoming an atheist or Nasthika, you're kind of leaving all of that behind. And so then you're losing out on so much. And I think it's having that kind of conversation, again, starting with the well-being of the child and dharma, and as parents, we have to navigate that, which means not taking the path of least resistance, but really thinking what is the best from a dharmic sense for my child, for us, for the family, for the whole. And I think that really does mean that you try your best to show the path of dharma, because it is so beneficial, is so important, and there's so much good from that. And if you truly believe that, then I think as parents, as we do like our own sadhana, and as we do like our own, we strengthen our own bhakti and things like that. And I wanted to read from a part of the Nasadiya Sukta from the Rig Veda. This is from the 10th mandala, so I'm just going to read some excerpts from it. But it's really some spectacular verses. So it says in part, at first was neither being nor non-being. There was not air, nor yet sky beyond. What was its wrapping, where, in whose protection? Was water there, unfathomable and deep? There was no death then, nor yet deathlessness. Of night or day there was not any sign. The one breathed without breath, by its own impulse. Other than that was nothing else at all. The seed of desire, born of mind first, arose in that all-pervading one that realized the sages with wisdom, meditating deep on their hearts, beyond that which is, bound that which is in that which is not. Who truly knows? Who can declare? From where did it come, this creation? Only later came the gods sent forth by it. Who else then knows? This creation, whence did it manifest, held forth by itself, or was it not? The one who witnessed from highest heavens, he surely knows, or he too knows not. And the reason I wanted to read from this is because in these verses, we see that even in the Vedas, there's this sense of It's not theist, it's not atheist, it's not agnostic. So there's it's not nihilism because there's the existence of one, but then the gods themselves may not know where they have come from. That too will just have its own effect. Because, one of the things we underestimate is just the power of puja, the power of sadhana, the power of bhakti. And these things, I've seen this I've seen this so many times where through a person's quiet faith, like their entire outlook of their family can change over time. So that's not always going to be what happens, but we shouldn't underestimate that power, and we shouldn't abandon or give up the journey of bringing our children to the dharmic path.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, parenting dharma requires that they continue to engage, not just give up on that point, right? Then other aspect also is that if they give up, right, this point of giving up it right there is also applicable when you need to also have seen the life after this, right? In the sense that next generation, right? Where how the next, right, this generation is right now at this stage, right? Okay, they are living the good samskara you have given them, right? So they are living good life. But then the dilution happened very next generation where it just go fall and fall and fall, right? Because and as you mentioned, that very possible that if you come across certain strong bad situation in life, event happens, right? Anywhere, work, life, anywhere, right? Then this is the philosophy and this is the practices can pull you back, right? Keep you floating. Versus something which is, you don't know, you may end up seeing your kids subscribing to drugs or something like that, unfortunately, right? Because to cope up this situation is not easy. Yeah, that's going to happen in anyone's life, right? So yes, so that's something to be noticed.
That's actually a really important point that you brought up, because if you say the opioid crisis in young people in America, or the rise of mental health issues and things like that, it's very much I think these things just show there's a crisis in well-being. And I think you could, like, everyone sees, people like do a little bit of yoga and they feel like, oh, their life is transformed. And then this yoga is it's just physical yoga. It's not even like real yoga. But if just doing like a very superficial physical yoga has such a positive effect on life, imagine what happens if you actually follow the yogic path. But I think this is something we have to emphasize. It's what sadhana, what yoga, what like puja can do for mental health, psychological health, and well-being is so important, and it's something that I hopefully would register and resonate with young people when we talk about it. And the other point that you made about the future generations is really important, and that's why you have to think about not just your child but the overall dharma, your responsibility for future generations, not just of your family, but of societies. What if Hinduism is gone, for example? So our part in that, and then understanding what it is our dharma to do, even though it seems very very difficult. Like in the Gita, even Arjuna didn't want to fight, but he had to fight. So this is something we also have to have, that nishta ourselves in dharma, and this belief that dharma is important and it's necessary to pass it on and to continue the transmission of it. So yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that.
No, precisely, yes. So parents lead by themselves using parenting dharma plus grounding themselves in own sadhana to continue on the path, right? That's the bottom line. Okay, so another question come up here is that, okay, they are exploring, they understood that there is a difference between Western framework of atheism and there is a Hindu worldview of Nasthika or Karvaka philosophy, right? How about that if someone say that, okay, I don't want to do this, or I don't want, okay, I understand the difference between Western atheism versus Hindu worldview, but I still want to pursue I want to consider myself as a cultural Hindu, and probably I accept of Karvaka philosophy. I subscribe to it, or otherwise I just want to remain cultural Hindu, right? So how and what are the repercussions of this situation?
Yeah, so the Charvaka school is always considered like a Nasthika school. So if you just believe in material existence, you don't accept the authority of the Vedas or kind of a Vedic lifestyle, then um, you're not really a Hindu in that sense. But let's say you say I don't want to believe in a god, but I'm culturally a Hindu. It's the same idea. Then what I would start with is within Hinduism, there's so much diversity of practices and paths. So if you want to be, you can be like a bhakta. If you don't want to deal with, the devas at all, if you're very humanistic, you can have a life dedicated to karma yoga. If you really want to focus on meditation, things like that, you can do Raja Yoga. There are many different paths. There's the paths of Tantra and different types of things, or you can just focus on Vedanta and innumerable paths. So it's impossible for me to believe that there's no path that'd be suitable for anyone within Hinduism because there's such diversity and pluralism. And then the point is, within the Hindu framework, let's say your goal isn't moksha in this lifetime. And for most people, it's not actually moksha in this lifetime. But what dharma is really about is the purushartha. So you're pursuing dharma, then artha and kama, and then and moksha, like all together. And so then being Hindu is really about finding that balance in life. And when you have the varnashrama system, in different stages of life, you're focused on different things. As a young person, you're focused on study. When you're married and you're focused on career and building a house and things like that. So in different stages of life, you focus on different things. And what dharma does is it allows you to do it in a balanced way and in a way that is good for the individual and good for the whole. So Amiga Nathad once said it's like sustainable living, and that's what it really is. And we have so much focus now on things like ESG and societal impacts and the environment and things like that. And all this is very important, but that actually already exists within the dharmic framework. So even if you just want to learn how to live a good life, Hindu Dharma has the answer for that. And it's really about finding that right way that in the pursuit of artha, which is like wealth, in the pursuit of our desires, you should pursue all those things. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be famous and successful and a celebrity and enjoying the finer things of life, but it's always within the umbrella of dharma. So how to do it in a way that doesn't destroy you and actually bring you down, and how to do it in a way that doesn't is not destructive for others in society. So in that sense, by following dharma, by following certain of the principles of dharma and a life of some amount of sadhana, or what I call observing niyamas and yamas, so like a certain lifestyle, then those things will automatically happen and you can still have a good life, even if you're not necessarily interested in moksha or like a spiritual goal. It still will take you to a good life in harmony, and that will lead you to growth in future lifetimes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I have two more questions which I want to actually three more questions. I want to just bunch two of them put together. One is that how do we engage younger generation in puja and rituals? And similar to it, how do temples do the same? I think you mentioned something previously as well about engaging kids in certain activities. Do you want to elaborate on this too?
Sure. So I think there is something there's just something very beautiful, like aesthetically beautiful about Hindu worship and Hindu temples. And I think about if you're in a puja, just like I remember as a child, we would go to like Durga Puja, and it used to be like in a high school auditorium. So it'd be during Navratri, the last few days for Bengalis. Durga Puja is very important. So there'd be a huge vigraha of Ma Durga, which is just beautiful and awe-inspiring, with her 10 hands and her weapons, and she's on her lion vahana. And then you would have like the agarbatti, you'd have like so many flowers, you could smell the flowers, and then like the kettle drums would be beat, and just like the rhythm of that beat was just very mesmerizing. Being part of that is just naturally enthralling and enchanting. So that has always kind of stayed with me. I think what happens is a lot of times we go and then the kids go off and they're playing games or something like that. So they're not really part of it. So they may be in the building, they may be in a temple, but they're kind of off doing their own thing and they're not really engaged in the process. So it could be something very simple that maybe you have kids, like make the flower garlands, or do something, just like clean the shrine area or things like that, but make them part of the puja. Or maybe they do archana of flowers with the 1,000 names or something like that. It's engaging them in seva, like if in the kitchen, if prasad is being prepared, maybe they're part of that process and things like that. So then if they're part of it, then it becomes part of them. So I think that applies both to pujas done at home, and then also to kind of a temple life also. I do see things like the Bal Vihar and things like that are, you know, are doing a good job, but I think there's more need for that, and understanding some of the needs of young people here, which is more on like counseling and giving advice on issues that they face in school or socially and things like that. I think there's a huge vacuum there that Hindu
Yes.
society and the community is not addressing. For example, things that come up in dating, or, you know, like if you have let's say you have a friend of another religion and they ask questions and you don't know how to answer. It's not just about giving answers, but how to navigate issues socially, and how to kind of live in this world, be part of the U.S. society, American society, but still be dharmic. And I think part of it is we ourselves kind of are reluctant to engage in some of those things. But then that leaves a vacuum. The other thing I would say is, you know, when going to India, usually those trips are about visiting relatives and things like that. But I really would recommend taking a few days, or at least one day, 1 or 2 days, to go on like a Tirth Yatra. And by that, I don't mean you take a flight to Kashi and you just go to the Kashi Vishwanath Mandir and you're done and then you leave and you stay at a 5-star hotel, because that's not exactly the thing. But I mean like a Tirth Yatra, which is really like a pilgrimage, and just maybe that day you fast, but there has to be some kind of like sacrifice or some restraint that you make for it to be really part of the sadhana. And then you go to the temples, or you do like a difficult parikram or something like that that takes something out of you. But that kind of anushtana or sadhana, or that building of tapovala, like, you know, let's say it's cold outside and you don't wear a jacket or something like that. You bathe in the Ganga, where it's like in Haridwar, where it's very cold. That kind of thing builds something within you, and those experiences will stay. I mean, if you go to the Himalayas, like, you'll naturally feel the sanctity and you'll feel something divine. So similar if you go to Vrindavan, but having more and more of those experiences be part of your child's life, I think will keep them within the Hindu fold.
Perfect. Yeah, so I could quote my own example where my little girl, 7-year-old, she loves Vishnu, by the way. So Vishnu's form, Krishna and Vishnu both. And we could very much engage in picking the flower for him, right? And she will happily do it. Otherwise, she won't do it, right? But when there is a turn of Vishnu, she will just happily do it. And you mentioned about visiting the Kshetra, right, or the spiritual place, which I was coming at the next question, saying that is very much importance, right? So that I think it's very important when we are doing the India visit, Bharat visit. Last time we went to Arunachala and we did a pradakshina, right? So of course, at the end of pradakshina, they were really tired, but then they still recall that, okay, we did this, and it was at least half of the time they were really in a fun mode,
Yes.
doing and experiencing things, and they now will have a lifetime memory, right? That's very much important, saying that lifetime memory of doing things. So yeah, so I think let's just take some questions from audience. Let me see.
There is a question from Ravi Chandranji, and it's asking, because we have talked about visiting Bharat and then doing the yatras and having that experience, and that stays with you. While you're here, that's maybe once a year you go there. Hopefully you're going there once a year and doing that. But having the daily practices at home, beyond that, how can parents who don't have access to temples, let's say they live somewhere in the Midwest or somewhere like that, to keep that community, to keep that understanding of what being a Hindu is, how can they, you know, being at that geographical disadvantage, how can they do that? And what exactly sadhana at home should focus more on? Those are the two questions from Ravi Chandranji.
Yeah, those are great questions. I would say if you're in a place where there isn't a temple nearby, then the beautiful thing about Hinduism is every practice can be done at home. So if it's, you know, Shivratri or Navaratri or Diwali, and nowadays online you can find puja vidhi for how to do those pujas at home, and then as much as possible involve your children in them. In terms of daily practice and daily sadhana, It can be it can be something very simple. It can be as simple as lighting a diya after having a bath and maybe just reciting a very simple stotra, like it could be Hanuman Chalisa, it can be the prayer to Ma Saraswati. It can be something that's 15 minutes. But once that becomes a daily practice, it just becomes a habit. So, by now, if I wake up in the morning and I shower and I don't do sadhana, it just feels very weird, or it doesn't feel right. So it's less about what is being done than making sure it's something that can be done on a daily basis without too much stress or pressure. And then also tap into what your child is naturally inclined towards. If they really like reading, maybe it's just lighting a diya and then just reading from the Gita for 15 minutes, or maybe it's offering flowers from the garden, or reciting a stotra, doing some simple japa. So if you have a sampradaya and parampara that you're already born into, then you continue those practices. Or if you don't have an established practice, then there are things that anyone can kind of do. So like Hanuman Chalisa is there, like Vishnu Sahasranama, things like that. And then that can just be incorporated into daily life. But I've seen even a very, very small, simple practice can have so much power and effect, and really stay with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, so I think it just that the concept of sadhana should be considered in parallel with you bath, you do brushing every day. Just likewise, sadhana has to be with a very simple 2 minute, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, right, to begin with, has to be part of it. I just want to add one thing here. Those who are in area where there is no temple or Bal Vihar, at least on HPN side, we offer a beautiful tree program where you could the children can participate virtually. Sukanya ji, any more question there?
Yes, this is by an anonymous attendee, and the person is saying that they have a 16-year-old who claims to be atheist, but he also enjoys watching Ramayana and to study the Bhagavad Gita, and is a student of the Vedanta Academy. Because of the child, the parent has started attending Hanuman Chalisa every Tuesday at the local temple, and the parent is saying they have the book by Kushal Mehra. Should their son, is it a good recommendation, you feel, for a 16-year-old to read that book? Or is this going to help him demystify himself about Dharma? Or what are your recommendations for that age?
So I think it's fine for him to read the book. The book is more what I'd call like an intellectual analysis of atheism, and kind of maybe like the differences between atheism and being a Gnostic within a Hindu framework. So from that perspective, I think it's fine for him to read. It's not what I would call something for personal advice on how to like on how to be a Hindu, or how to be a Nasthika Hindu, or something like that. So it's more intellectual and abstract, but I think it's fine to read, especially the chapters that talk about atheism and kind of critique the modern atheist movement. I think that part would be helpful.
Thank you very much. One
last question, and before we wrap this up.
One of the things that another person suggested was, I believe it's Sangeeta C. It's saying, so in terms of keeping in touch with your culture and with Dharma and the practices, is there anything you know of where there are groups that actually go to Bharat with their children, just like you would see kids, Jewish kids taking trip to Israel? Is there any kind of organization that does that, or is that something that should be developed?
I think that's a great idea. I know like ISKCON, I think, does some kind of similar things, but I'm not aware of a more like broad-based movement. I think there are like some seva organizations where they organize seva, like kind of trips to Bharat. So there may be, I'm not very directly familiar, but that is a great idea to do something like that.
Yeah, I just want to add that, yes, I think there are programs by Chinmaya Mission, but then they offer it somewhere in the Caribbean place or somewhere in south of Bharat, where they could live in, kids can live in for a month or 3 months and just work it out. I think that should be one option. And we also trying to do this something here in US, Canada itself. So please write to us if you are interested. We could work out something at least here while you make arrangement in Bharat in future. So with that said, we want to wrap this up. Dhanyavad Aditi ji coming here answering all these questions. So I think so Kanya ji, any last word from you or?
And well, I think one of the things that Aditi ji really touched upon that has been very close to my heart is that gap that we see in children growing up here, having to sort of navigate two cultures that are different, and not knowing how to, with all that's going on in the environment around them outside of home, how to answer some of those things and the impact that it has upon their identity, their mental health, like she said. And I really would like us, like she had said, think upon that as a community. And I think that is something that needs to really be addressed for not just, kids, but also I think young adults who come here with their families back in Bharat. And there's such a large group that does come here for work, for education. And I feel like they sort of are flailing in the wind sometimes because they don't know where to get that community or get that support. And it would be great to see more work, more people who are interested in doing this coming forward and doing something about it. But it was enlightening. It was an amazing conversation listening to the two of you. And Aditi ji, thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to reading your books.
Thank you. I really want to thank you for addressing this topic because it's such an important and timely topic. And a lot of times we kind of shy away from these difficult conversations, but I'm really glad you're taking this on and other similar issues.